At first glance, Spider-Man Miles Morales may seem like a near carbon copy of Spider-Man PS4, but each subsequent glance you take reveals more and more of how Miles Morales builds on the formula of Spider-Man PS4. This spin-off takes already great features from the original and injects them with some new abilities that have absolutely nothing to do with spiders, but are so dope it does not matter. Let's look at how it does this. Before I talk about all the good, I just want to get out of the way that I played this on a base PS4, and it was rough. Huge frame rate drops and glitches to the point where I had to restart the game on several occasions. But that is on a base PS4. I hear the game runs pretty smoothly on the PS5, so I'm not really going to go into these issues. I personally cannot afford a PS5 right now, so I'm actually just grateful I was able to play it at all. And they seem to have made the PS4 version with very short notice, so I can see why it released in this state. That being said, the first way Miles Morales improves on Spider-Man PS4 is there are no more boring stealth sections. Mary Jane is away with Peter, and Miles has superpowers now, so it both makes sense within the story and within the fact that everyone hated them. We will go over more of these types of improvements later, but now I just want to get into the main gameplay loop. Miles has two new abilities, his Venom Attacks and his ability to go invisible or camouflage. Once you have these abilities, it creates an incredibly fun and dynamic combat cycle that all connects together effortlessly. Firstly, many of the abilities you had at the end of Spider-Man PS4 are present at the beginning of Miles Morales, like the ability to throw rockets back at enemies or the web-swinging abilities like the air tricks that get you XP. This is a great choice given how many new abilities are introduced, and addressing that feeling of having abilities taken away in a sequel, where you take a rocket to the face and are like, I feel like something's missing. At the beginning of the game, when I saw finishers required a combo count of 15 to use and not building up the focus bar, I got upset and wrote a whole paragraph down ranting about how this ruins the whole risk-reward system of the first game, because you had to choose between using the focus to heal or using it for a finisher in that game. But then, a couple minutes later, not only was I proven wrong, I realized this was building to an even better system. After I cleaned the egg off my face, I saw that the focus bar is now used for healing in Miles' new Venom Attack. These are a set of attacks that stun, damage, and allow you to do more damage to enemies with electricity. You unlock them as you go through your first playthrough. The first of these is the Venom Punch. This targets and does damage to one enemy, and they are left Venom stunned, allowing you to get some hits in and ups the damage you deal to that enemy. You can think of Venom stun as what happens when you look directly into my beautiful eyes. The next is the Venom Smash, and my personal favorite. It's an AoE attack where you leap into the air and smash down, inflicting enemies within your range with a Venom stun. It's very quick, effective, and beautifully flashy, making it an immensely satisfying form of crowd control. Then there is the Venom Jump, which launches nearby enemies into the air and Venom stuns them. Great for armed enemies. This allows you to immediately transition to air combat, where Miles is more dangerous. Then there is the Venom Dash, where you quickly lunge towards an enemy and throw them. This is great for some of the speedier enemies and bosses in the later game. And finally, the most powerful of them all, the Mega Venom Blast. This takes 3 whole bars of focus and isn't unlocked until very late in the game. It KOs any enemies around Miles and results in a full heal. This became my go-to option for healing in the late game and New Game Plus. The other ability I mentioned, Camouflage, is a way for Miles to temporarily go invisible and be able to get some free hits in on unsuspecting enemies. Every ability I've mentioned can be upgraded in really clever and satisfying ways that only add to the awesome cycle that these moves create. Each ability ties together with others, as well as Miles' 4 gadgets. The loop goes as such. Go invisible and use gadgets with normal hits to build up the Venom bar. Use Venom Attack. Venom stun enemies allow you to build up more of a combo. Get enough of a combo to unleash a finisher. The finisher restores focus, and the camouflage recharges. The finishers you've used restore your gadgets, allowing you to reuse those, and the cycle keeps going and is so enjoyable because every ability leads you to be able to use another ability. When listed like this, it almost sounds like a checklist, but in practice, it's high intensity and immensely engaging gameplay. Also, the risk-reward system of healing is even more extreme here because of how tightly locked together these systems can be. A heal can save you from death, but will slow down your damage output because it interrupts the cycle building up the focus bar and combo count is based around. Invisibility isn't unlocked until later in, so it's a super smart move of Insomniac to include a New Game Plus right from launch. The game requires one, given its length. In my opinion, Miles Morales improves on its predecessor in its activities and upgrades as well, or at least how they're handled. The first thing that I like like is that there isn't a ton of different tokens for each different activity. There are just activity tokens which you can use to upgrade and unlock any gear. There are still bases, side missions, activities, crimes, collectibles, just like the original, but because each one gives one token type, this allows players to skip activities they don't want to do, and still leaves them with plenty of options for unlocking gear. There's also a Taskmaster-like set of challenges that Peter leaves for Miles. These give you activity tokens, but also unlock skills. Super fitting for this type of side content. You do, however, have to collect tech parts to unlock gear, which come from underground caches around the city and can be found completing underground hideouts and Roxxon labs. These are like bases from Spider-Man PS4. Although they are more restrictive in where you can find them than the activity tokens, they are easy enough to find while swinging through the city, and much fewer are required to upgrade your gear than the activity tokens. I also like the slightly different way crimes are handled in this one. In Spider-Man PS4, to get 100% completion on a district, you have to stop a certain amount of crimes in that district. To accomplish this, you sometimes had to swing around aimlessly waiting for a randomly generated crime to appear, which results in Spider-Man hoping someone is in danger. In this one, Miles has an app that alerts him to side missions, activities, and crimes. All crimes are listed on the app, and you can just select one and then go complete it. They also kept in the randomly generated crimes as well, though, so you can continue collecting activity tokens from these as you swing around the city, even when you've completed the actual crime checklist, just like in the original. This creates the best of both worlds, easier for completionists and still the possibility of a constant stream of upgrade tokens. Another gear/activity problem I had with the first one has been partially addressed here. Things are saved for New Game Plus. It's not much, but abilities, a suit, and gadget upgrades are saved for the New Game Plus playthrough. This gives so much more incentive to do the side activities in your second playthrough, and prevents you from feeling totally stagnant with your upgrades for the entire thing. It was definitely a step in the right direction. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is how much better the non-airborne boss fights are handled here. The first game had incredibly fun airborne boss fights, but many of the boss fights on the ground just boil down to some basic gimmicks, like having to stun Rhino with environmental objects before you could hit him. In Miles Morales, though, they made these boss fights feel fun for the same reason the regular combat is fun, and requires you to use all the same skills while remaining challenging. The specific fights I'll be referring to are the Prowler and Tinkerer. Prowler has some obvious ways of achieving this, like summoning clones of himself, but they reduce the length he is typically stunned unless you Venom stun him. That, combined with his ability to go invisible, requires you to use all your tools and treat him just like a group of enemies. Whenever he goes invisible, he becomes functionally like an enemy you've defeated, and it's so quick moving it's not like constantly entering a separate phase. The Tinkerer was a very aggressive enemy, who you also had to stun to hit just like any other boss. She shared some of the same characteristics as the Prowler in that you could get a very limited amount of hits on her per stun unless she was Venom stunned. She felt much more difficult to get into this stun state because of the prevalence of her attacks and evasiveness, though. This led to me using my gadgets and invisibility to build up my focus meter, then using my focus to Venom stun, and then using those combos to perform finishes. Does this sound familiar? That's because it's the exact same gameplay loop that makes the rest of the game so captivating, but within the context of a boss fight. They are still more powerful and require you to understand their patterns, but you don't suddenly have to play in a completely different way that the combat was never really oriented around. They clearly put a ton of work into balancing this loop, so it's great to see them utilize it in the boss fights so much better than the original game. Even the fight with Rhino was a much better match for these gameplay systems. It was still gimmick-oriented, but you had to contend with a group of enemies, and it took more steps to stun him while breaking his armor that kept you on the offensive, rather than just waiting for him to get closer to an environmental object like in the first game. Spider-Man Miles Morales impressed me so much. It was able to capture the same feel as the original while building and improving on it. Also, it was Christmas themed, so as a holiday surprise, I'm including a real rating. Spider-Man Miles Morales gets a rating of 10 out of this. Like, subscribe, and click the notification bell, friends.